Welcome to episode 20 of the Resurrection Podcast. I am Acusio Bivona. I want to run a diagnostic on a specific moment in your timeline. It's 3 a.m. The house is perfectly quiet. The security system is armed. The cars are in the driveway. The portfolio is diversified and performing. You've acquired every single metric of success that you set out to achieve 10 years ago. On paper, you're at the absolute apex of your professional architecture. But you're staring at the ceiling, wide awake, and your biological infrastructure is registering a massive, undeniable void. You feel completely, terrifyingly empty. You feel like you're sitting behind the wheel of a perfectly engineered, high-performance machine, but the navigation system is completely offline. You have the velocity, but you have absolutely no vector. And then the guilt hits you. Your prefrontal cortex tries to rationalize the data. So you tell yourself, I should be grateful. I have the title. I have the money. Why am I experiencing this level of system lag? So you shut the diagnostic down. You force yourself back to sleep, and you wake up at 5:30. You pour the coffee, you put on the suit, and you fake the presence. You go back to managing the logistics of your empire. But you know internally the truth. You're operating offline. You're hitting targets, but you're not traveling anywhere. We need to look at the physics of this emptiness. Why does a man who has successfully installed every professional upgrade still feel entirely dormant? It comes down to a fundamental error in your operating system. You're confusing a goal with a purpose. They're not the same thing. A goal is a target you hit. It's a metric. It's closing the Q3 revenue gap, acquiring the competitor, or dropping your body fat to 12%. Goals are necessary. They're the tactical milestones of a capable operator. But a purpose is a direction you travel. It's the core architecture that dictates why the machine is running in the first place. When you dedicate a decade of your life to achieving a goal, you use massive amounts of adrenaline and focus to execute. But what happens the absolute second you hit the target? The chase is over. If you don't have a purpose, an overarching direction that supersedes the financial metric, your system suddenly has nowhere to allocate its energy. You begin to idle. So let's look at the biological cost of an idling system. When a high-performing executive loses his vector, his autonomic nervous system doesn't simply power down into a state of peaceful rest. An apex machine is not designed to sit in the driveway. It's designed for execution. When your hardware is revving but has no direction, your body registers that lack of utility as a biological threat. Your baseline cortisol begins to elevate. You experience a low-level constant hum of anxiety. Your sleep architecture degrades because your brain is running background diagnostics all night, desperately searching for a signal, searching for an order to execute. You try to sedate the idling engine. You pour 3 fingers of scotch. You spend 2 hours doom scrolling. You manufacture professional friction just to feel the adrenaline of solving a problem again. You're trying to navigate a complex, highly demanding environment using only your own internal intuition. You're looking for a signal, but your receiver is completely turned off. A man without a connection to a directional source higher than his own ego is just a machine driving in circles, burning fuel until the engine inevitably seizes. This specific system lag manifests in highly predictable patterns. Let's look at the telemetry of the men running this offline code. First, we have the serial optimizer. This is the executive who realizes he feels empty, but he tries to solve a software problem with external hardware patches. He thinks the void is a lack of physical optimization, so he buys the cold plunge, or he installs an infrared sauna. He tracks his REM sleep down to the minute. He hires a team of dietitians. He builds a flawless, impenetrable physical routine. And his physical metrics are impeccable, but his eyes are entirely dead. He's polishing the armor of a soldier who has absolutely no war to fight. He's optimized his biology, but because he has no overarching vector, the optimization just becomes another empty goal. He's still staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m. He just has a lower resting heart rate while he does it. Then we have the ego architect. This is the man who has bought into the most dangerous, anxiety-producing lie of the modern era. The market tells him, create your own reality, invent your own meaning. This sounds like a powerful executive directive, but it's actually a trap. When you try to invent your own purpose, you're relying entirely on the ego. And the ego is a highly volatile, fragile reference point. The ego chooses a direction based on what looks impressive to the board, what secures the highest compensation, or what outpaces the competition. The ego architect spends 10 years building a massive, towering structure. But because it was designed by his ego and not grounded in a deeper objective directive, the moment the market shifts, the moment the public stops clapping, the entire structure sways. He feels the emptiness because he knows deep in his deep infrastructure that he manufactured the whole thing. Here's the clinical truth. You don't invent your purpose. You discover it. Think of a hammer. A hammer doesn't wake up and invent itself as a screwdriver. If it attempts to be a screwdriver, it will be highly inefficient and eventually damage itself. A hammer discovers that it is dense, heavy, and perfectly balanced for a specific high-impact action. It discovers its utility. You must discover yours. But you can't discover it if your receiver is turned off. Now let's look at the absolute certainty of the void. When you decide to be the ultimate architect of your own meaning, you think you're claiming absolute freedom. You tell yourself that because you answer to no one, no boss, no board, no higher authority, you've reached the apex of the executive life. But you haven't created freedom. You've created a massive, unmanageable system load. When you act as the highest authority in your universe, your biological infrastructure has to bear the absolute weight of every single outcome. There is no offload mechanism. There is no redundant system to catch the overflow. Your nervous system is forced to process the entirety of your existence through the incredibly narrow, volatile lens of your own ego. And the ego is a tyrant. It's a highly inefficient navigation system. It will demand that you acquire another company, build a larger house, or hit a higher net worth, not because those things provide actual utility, but because the ego requires constant external validation just to prove it is still online. This is why you feel the anxiety. This is why you feel the emptiness. The void in your chest is the physical manifestation of a machine that is burning its own hardware just to stay warm. You're trying to run a closed loop authority, and your biology is lagging under the immense weight of the role. The men who actually sustain their edge, the men who possess true, unshakable presence, don't operate this way. They recognize that they're not the source of the signal. They're the receiver. They submit their actions, their businesses, and their marriages to an immutable external standard. They have a code that supersedes their own temporary fluctuating desires. When you anchor your operating system to an absolute standard, the pressure drops. You no longer have to invent your reality. You simply have to execute your daily orders. You stop idling and you start moving. We're going to replace the code. You can't reactivate your presence by setting another arbitrary financial metric. We must tune the receiver and reestablish the connection. We do this through a specific 30-day architectural timeline. I call this the receiver protocol. Days 1 through 10 is the silence directive. You can't acquire a new signal if your bandwidth is entirely consumed by static. For the first 10 days, you must enforce a strict 20-minute quarantine on all external inputs the absolute second you wake up. No podcasts, no market updates, no emails, no social media. You wake up, you hydrate, and you sit or meditate in absolute silence. Allow your autonomic nervous system to boot up without the immediate synthetic adrenaline of the digital world. You're creating the physical space necessary for a new directive to enter the system. Days 11 to 20 is the standard integration. Once the silence is established, you introduce the absolute. You must begin reading the manual. This means integrating immutable truth into your morning architecture before you look at the daily news. Whether that's scripture, the Stoic texts, or the foundational literature of your faith, you must expose your prefrontal cortex to a standard of execution that is higher than your own ego. You are realigning your vector to true north. And days 21 to 30 includes the daily report. This is where the vector is finalized. You replace the frantic morning strategizing with a composed daily report. You can call it prayer, you can call it meditation, but the mechanical function is the exact same. You are acknowledging that you are not the highest authority in this chain of command. You sit in the silence and you silently state, I am reporting for duty. What are the orders for today? You're no longer the lone operator trying to force the market into compliance. You are a highly capable agent awaiting deployment. Let me give you the exact telemetry of an executive who ran this protocol. David, 51 years old, and he had just sold his manufacturing firm for a massive 8-figure exit. For 20 years, his entire identity, his complete operational focus, was tied to scaling that company. The day the funds cleared his account, he expected to feel absolute relief. But instead, he went completely offline. He had the money, he had the time, and he had absolutely zero vector. His sleep architecture degraded. He started drinking heavily in the afternoons just to sedate the anxiety of having nothing to execute. His wife told me he looked like a ghost walking around their estate. He had hit the ultimate goal, but the void was suffocating him. He applied for a system diagnostic, and we intercepted his idling. I told him to run the receiver protocol. We stripped away the noise. We enforced the morning silence. We integrated the daily report. And David realized that his utility was not to accumulate more wealth. His utility was to deploy his operational knowledge to build younger men. He took his massive business acumen and began mentoring young, struggling founders. He stopped trying to invent his meaning and discovered his vector. Within 40 days, his baseline cortisol normalized, his resting heart rate dropped, the drinking stopped entirely, and he reclaimed his edge, not by trying harder, but by aligning his machine with a clear, absolute directive. He became fully composed. You have to run a diagnostic on your own environment tonight. Are you sitting in the driveway, revving the engine, and wondering why the scenery never changes? Are you exhausted from the sheer weight of trying to invent your own reality? Empty optimization is not an executive strategy. It's a biological drain. If you look around your life and realize you've built a massive professional empire, but your internal architecture is completely silent, if you are hitting every target but traveling nowhere, it's time to execute the system reboot. Go to coachkuz.com and apply for the Resurrection Strategy Call. I will be your red team. We will audit your current operating system. We will locate exactly where your receiver is jammed, and we will build the precise protocol you need to reactivate your presence and reclaim your vector. Stop idling in the dark. Rebuild the machine. Resurrect the man. I am Acusio Bivona, and I will see you in the work.